I need proof that I spoke to you. Otherwise, I'm doing it for love and charity. Let's quickly go through to the first slide again. Please switch off your video and mute your microphone. Remember to write your student number in the chat. If you have any queries, you can send it to these emails, and CT Intat is the one that will solve any technical queries that you have. I'm supposed to solve your English problems. Please complete the feedback form and remember that the session is being recorded. Before we start with the session, I want to go back to where you are. How did it go with your exams? You can unmute yourself while we're chatting. Have you written any exams?
Yes, it actually went quite well. I mean, I managed to download everything, so I never had any of the technical problems that it seems as though many others had.
Okay.
Tomorrow I'm writing Causa, so I'm a bit nervous about that. Yeah, but no, it's been going okay.
Okay. And do you work on fiber, or did you have to use cell phone data?
We've still got ADSL, and we are 5 users in the house, so it was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, it actually worked out okay. My daughter's busy writing exams, and both of my school kids are also busy with work, and my husband's sitting on Zoom the whole time. So it was a bit of a challenge, but no, things have actually worked out fine.
I'm glad to hear that. And Naeem, how did it go with you? Okay, he remains muted. I suppose all of you have handed in your, you've submitted your assignment on the short story.
Yes.
Okay. I have to look in the chat. Okay, you've written your names in the chat, and then remember, as we progress with the workshop, please do write any queries that you have in the chat. Let's tackle the. Okay. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you an introduction to the novel on which you are going to do your next assignment. And I must say, when I read the book during the December holidays when I saw we have a new prescribed book. I downloaded it and I read it. And I thought, this is not the easiest book to do with people, but now that I've started reading up on the author and how well respected he is in literary circles, I am really impressed, and I'm looking forward to reading the book again. I don't know whether you have had a look at the third assignment, but the more when I prepared the lesson, I realized that one of the truest things they say is that you need to read the book at least twice before you start the assignment. So even if you have during the exams only time to read one chapter at a time or a few pages, do that. And use the background of this lecture or workshop to make notes while you are reading, so that with the second reading you can merely add to the notes you've made. Read the assignment before you start with the reading, so that at least they want you to comment on the themes, so that you at least have an eye open for any themes, but it is really important. I don't know if I can pronounce his name correctly, but it's Nithling Mashop. I can't really, but it is, he is highly respected in his environment. This is the author, and as you can see from his demeanor, there are many photos of him on the internet, but this one suits. I also found an interview that he had with the Johannesburg Review, which is a publication. I've only seen it online. So I think it's an online publication in which they interview authors of a certain reputation. And in this interview I used, because I used the interview, it is on this slide, the link to the interview is there. And really, he is an amazing guy. I'll advise you, before you start reading the book, to read up about him, because as mixed up as the main character in his book is, so sure of himself, he knows what he wants, he knows what he wants to do with his literature, he knows other authors, and he considers himself an author and a reader. And I am now looking forward to discussing the book with you, and especially in discussing the assignment with you. I think he is an author worth exploring. He's a South African novelist, which I really think the university did the right thing. Previously, they did 2 novels, and the one was Catcher in the Rye, which is an American novel. And I found that many of the students, and I didn't blame them, it's a rich boy looking for himself. And people, now I sound very old, which I am, but people my age can relate to his problems. We've passed that stage and we can have sympathy. But if you live in a country like ours, where people struggle so much, I honestly found it difficult to evoke pity or even empathy with the main character in Catcher in the Rye. Whereas with this character, he's also a lost soul, but I could understand, and I see the way open to explain to people why we will have sympathy and empathy with this main character. What this Nithking Moshlezi did was, James Coetzee is one of South Africa's Nobel Prize winners. So he is James Coetzee is a world-renowned author, and he wrote a book called There's Something of Michael K. And that is quite a dystopian novel. And that was part of the books for which James Coetzee got the Nobel Prize. It is, I can't remember the full story anymore, but this Michael is, I think, a colored or a black man taking a white woman by kind of carrying her all the way to Prince Albert. And he took that novel and he told this story, but the story is told through the woman's eyes. And he took that novel and he changed it into Michael K. And he used that character to write a book. Now, for a young novelist to tackle somebody with the stature of J.M. Coetzee, you need to know what you're doing. And he did it. And because he did it so well. J.M. Coetzee was prepared to write the cover page for Small Things, in which he seriously recommended reading the book. So we are in very good company. Here are some excerpts from the interview that he had with the Johannesburg Review. He says the socio-political context is an important consideration or ingredient in the thematic choices at the disposal of artists. And we are going to discuss the setting of the novel later on. But when you look at it, what he says is we have a society and we have a political system. And within this system and this society, we find the themes to struggle with and to engage with. If I say struggle, it means that it is difficult to understand life. But his book gives us an opportunity to look at life anew. And you will see that part of the book I consider very strong political commentary as well. Don't keep it in mind, but because it's not part of your assignment. But for instance, he speaks about Thabo Mbeki with great admiration, and he calls him a well-read man. So he, Mushlele, it really puts pressure on his reader to know what he is reading. And then I asked him what would be his audience. And his answer was curious, informed, open-minded human beings on 6 continents. I want you to pay attention to the 6 continents. So even though he is an African writer, he does not write for Africa. He is thinking in terms of the universe. And where you have to actually evaluate him you have to say whether he succeeds in what he sets out to do in the assignment. Because to me, Johannesburg is another country. I haven't been there in the past 10 years, I think. There was a time when I went there quite often, but now I think in the last 7 to 10 years, I haven't been there. And does his story make sense, even though we don't know the environment so well? So he expects his reader to understand and to have read other books. Then what makes it amazing and what makes him even more of an African writer, 2 things. The first one, he is the son of an illiterate person. His mother can't read or write. But he says she's one of his best critics. He says she has natural intelligence, compassion, generosity of spirit. That's what literature is, essentially. So you can see what high expectations he has of his reader and of his work. The other, I said there are 2 things that makes him a truly African writer. The other one is that it wasn't even an English teacher who said to him that he should go on with writing. It was a Sepedi teacher. He comes from Limpopo. And that teacher told him, you have talent, you should keep on writing. And he says he writes poetry in his mother tongue, and he would like to publish the poetry in his mother tongue, which of course opens up a whole world. If you are interested in linguistics, why would he write in one or other language? Let's go. Do you have any questions up till now? Okay. The title, Small Things. Here, I'd really appreciate if you would write answers in the chat so that I can have, because I want you to go on a thinking journey with me, where we think about what I'm saying, because this is like opening up the novel for you. Look at, his book was published in 2013. And it has several covers. The book I downloaded had the blue cover, this one, had that one. This is another cover. I haven't seen this specific cover, and I have seen in a library this cover. What do you think? What is evoked by these covers that I have chosen? And it will be interesting once you've started reading the book, which cover do you think is most appropriate? Have you seen the covers? What do you think is most appropriate? Now, Kyla, I see you've joined us as well. One of you, please unmute and tell me, are you writing? Because remember, sometimes I need to refresh for the chat to show.
I'm busy writing now.
Okay. Oh, there are two chats going on. The one is, okay. Let's see if we go back. I think the blue cover and the cover with I also like the one with the Nelson Mandela Bridge. And Melissa, have you read this story?
Yes, I have read it.
Okay, so you know the symbolism of the Nelson Mandela Bridge. Any of you others, have you read the book? Anyway, at least now I know that my it's working. The chat is working. If we go back, what do you think? Small things. What is that? And remember, you can't be wrong at this stage. technically speaking, you have just received the book from the courier, and you look at the cover and you see the title is Small Things. What are your expectations when somebody calls a book Small Things? What are your expectations of the book? In the quote that you get for your assignment, he says, "I'm not Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela." Remember, the main character goes to jail for 18 years. And he says, "I'm not Desmond Tutu. I'm not Nelson Mandela." This is a story of an ordinary person, and his life is actually small. He's born in Sophia Town, which is something like our District 6. It was, remember we spoke about it in that I Could Have Loved Gold. They also refer to Sophia Town. It is a place like our District 6, where poor people used to live. They made a living there, and then they were moved to Soweto. So he has been in one place his whole life, except for the time that he was imprisoned in the same place. So to me, the title evoked a kind of pity, is too strong a word, but there are so many ordinary people like us who really just want to live a good life. And we see that in this book. So what do we associate with the title? And think about the title, because the thing about literature is that we have to think about it for a long time before we can write about it. I suppose I have told you this, but I'm often asked to speak to people, to groups of people about books. And I have a friend who's a professional musician. And once I thought I need somebody to cheer me on, and I asked her to come to one of my talks. And afterwards she said to me, "You must read a book more than once before you give such a talk." But of course, that's what's the difference between an ordinary book and a book like this. Every time we read it, we notice something else, because as we change, the book changes with us. How does that tie in with what you know about the author? And when I still had face-to-face classes, at this stage, I would be walking up and down and tell them, "I see you don't take notes. Please take notes." And I'm asking you to take notes for two reasons. The one is, I don't give you notes of everything that I say. You only, if I post anything, it's only the slides. The second reason is that I started writing exams in the 60s, As you can see, it was a long time ago. Since then, I've written several exams, and not in one was I expected to sit and stare at somebody for 2 hours. I had to write. So it's very important that you actually make notes. And in this case, I want to go back to what he has said here, where he speaks about the socio-political context. We're not all politicians, but when Cyril Ramaphosa spoke last night, it affected our society. What happens in society affects politics, and politics affects society. And when he speaks about small things, it refers to ordinary people living an ordinary life. And then Melissa and I liked this one, and that one I think was chosen because the author himself likes jazz, and the main character in this book plays the trumpet or the clarinet, one or other instrument, because he sometimes busks to make money. Now, what I'm going to do with you for the rest of the exercise is I'm going to speak to you about the terminology. I would advise you, as you are reading through it, to have several pages with you. And again, I would advise you to write, physically write longhand, because what the body remembers. When you write in the exam and you have written down the name of one of the characters, you not only remember the name, your body helps you to remember to spell the name correctly. Now, there's a difference between plot and story. They have this example, they call it an analogy in your study guide, where they say, if I should ask you, tell me about your day, you won't give me minute details like I took 7 steps between my front door and my car. We leave out, we only speak about the main events. So the story is like this with all kinds of detail, but the plot refers to the main events. And we're going to speak about it again. But this book isn't told in this order. It tells a bit, and then it will tell you about 4, and then it goes back to 1, and then it goes to 8, and then it comes back to 4. So unless you keep a timeline, you may get lost in the plot. The notes about the plot is in your 501 study guide and on page 65. So the plot has to do with significant events. I am focusing on these significant events because at the end of the year, when you get your exam, when you write the exam, you will only get 1 or 2 paragraphs from the book, and you can quote from those paragraphs. But to prove your point, you will have to remember the events outside this quote that you have and refer to those events. So it's very important that you, where you make notes, that you indicate what were significant events. I am already getting quite nervous on your behalf for the end of the year exam, because you have a full year. I haven't counted the poetry, but I think it's 20 to 25 poems and 6 or 8 short stories and a novel. It's impossible to study all that the week before the exam. So the better notes you make, the easier your exam will be. Now, these events are connected. Sometimes they're in contrast. For instance, in this story, he falls in love with 2 women, the one Desiree and the other one's called Mercedes. And there are contrasts between these 2 women that he loves so much. There are also in the events similarities. Then what we can also have is that the one element is a parallel of the other event, which means that they are more or less the same events, but there's a matter of intensity that's different from the one event to the other. And those are the things that you need to make a note of while reading. I'm going back to the chat to see if you have any, do you have any questions up till now? We are so few in the class that you can actually unmute yourself and either comment or you can simply ask a question if you want to.
Mrs. Talyard, I don't think that chat is refreshing itself.
Okay, let me go. Oh, there's an activity, so. Okay. Okay, now I can see again. No questions from one. Happy for now. That sounds good. But remember, I'm not really going into the story with you at the moment in detail. Once in the next one, I will start looking at the story in detail. So at this stage, even if you really want to know more about the difference between the I can simply do this. Even if you only want to know a bit more about the technical details that we're discussing, feel free to unmute yourself. You can put up your hand so that I can see that you need me, and then you can unmute and speak, because we're only 5 in the conversation. I think it will be easier. So as you go along with the plot, you make notes of the events. Then those events will have tension and conflict. Now, tension is when we don't know what is going to happen. And that is why it is so important when we get to characterization that the reader at least have empathy with the character. You don't need to, sympathy is something else. You don't need to feel pity for the person, but at least if that person is unhappy, you need to be able to identify and feel that that character has a reason to be unhappy. So if we don't know what's going to happen next, there's tension. And in this case, we have inner and outer conflict. Internal conflict. The main character, and interesting enough, it links actually to the title, Small Things. We don't know what the small things are. And the person involved in the small things are also anonymous. He never gets a name. So you need to refer to him in your essay as the main character. He's obviously a person who can love deeply because he falls in love with Desiree. We don't get the idea that he's ever promiscuous as a young man. And later on, he also loves Mercedes. But it is this young person looking for meaning in life. So there's internal conflict. External conflict can be conflict with the environment. And when he's arrested, it's definitely external conflict. And I was thinking, he is arrested as a result of an article he's written, because for a time he works as a journalist. So he becomes in conflict with the political environment. The apartheid regime sees him as a danger. Therefore, he stays in jail for 18 years. They speak about conflict with the supernatural. I can't remember. I'll have to go through the book again to see if there are really examples of that. But for instance, if a character has a religious or a spiritual struggle, that would be then, in that case, conflict with the supernatural. Again, I have given you the website where I found this information. It's in the footer if you want to consult those yourself. Then the difference between climax and resolution. The climax is when it's at the tension is at its highest, because at the time he actually has to decide between Desiree and Mercedes. And they also have to decide if they want him. So we have the tension in that bit is the highest, and that then is the climax. Afterwards, when we are prepared, when the main character is prepared to accept the outcome, or the outcome has certain consequences, that is called the resolution. Then the setting. In this case, the setting is Johannesburg, and it both in time and in place. Which eras are referred to in the book? It's quite interesting because if you have a straight timeline, it starts off in Sophiatown, and it starts off with during the time of apartheid. And then it moves to the time after the general election. He doesn't mention Zuma by name, but he does speak about nepotism because he finds a job in some other tourism office. Not a career that's worth his while, but he does have this. And he is even mugged at a certain time. So he had a tough life under apartheid. Then we had the elections, he was put free, but life hasn't really changed for him at all. So while you are reading, you have to look at the setting with time and location. Which eras are referred to in the book? Apartheid and post-apartheid. For what is the era in the book known? And we see nepotism, crime. He speaks about young men dying predictable deaths. So we get an idea that he has lost faith that life can improve and will become better. Sorry, I need. And then the location. It's important that you go and read up about Sophiatown before you start reading the book. In I Could Have Loved Gold, Sophiatown is seen quite romantic, whereas in this book, the people are poor and struggle and the alleys are dirty. And then Johannesburg, as a place where people are very wealthy, but also a place where people are very poor, downtrodden, lots of violence. And then the Nelson Mandela Bridge that we could see on the cover of the one book. A bridge is often a connection. What is the link between the places linked by the Mandela Bridge? Because he often walks across the bridge. Does he actually leave one setting? I'm always nervous if you are so quiet. Are there any questions at the moment? I don't even see something in the chat. So we have a page in which we try and keep the plot, the events going. And then we have another page on which we make notes about the setting and we join them to the events. Because, for instance, he is mugged by a dark figure, he's shot. Where does that happen? What does it symbolize, the fact that he's being shot in this new free South Africa? And here, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. If we describe something if I tell you about, I went into town today, and if I tell you about the town, you will know a bit more about the town. But the way that I tell you the things that I saw would tell you also something about me. So a question that you really have to notice, but you'll only, I think, be able to notice it on the second reading. What do we learn about the character from the descriptions of the setting? And that is quite important because when we speak about the themes, one of the themes is, what is the place of art, literature, music, the fine arts? What is the place of that in society? Now, somebody who struggles with that sense, what will he see in a poor, dirty place like Sophiatown? I keep on referring to Sophiatown as the District 6 of Johannesburg. But if you look at many, the District 6 Museum has homecoming dinners once a month, or they used to have homecoming dinners, and I went once or twice to them. And the people remember District 6 fondly. They have photos and everything there. I don't know how many of you have been there to the museum. But by painting Sophiatown in its dirt and poverty, he is saying something about do not romanticize the past. And what does that say about a character who can be that honest about the past? Oh, and this quote is from Henry Thoreau. It does not come from the book. Now, the narrative perspective is who is telling the story. Remember when we did the prep for the short stories, it was about a first or third person narrator. In this case, it is again a first person narrator. And what we do if it's a first person narrator, we test what he's telling us against what's happening in the book. Now the main character tells us about himself, but there are also descriptions by his friend the Cuban. I think his name is Martinet, Mercedes' father. There are descriptions by Mercedes, by Desiree, and by Desiree's husband about him. And you have to compare and see, do those descriptions actually line up? Is he seeing himself objectively? Because the question, who's the narrator? The narrator is the main character in the story. So how does that influence the reading of the novel? We have to test the narrator against other events in the book. And that is one, they were, Catcher in the Rye had the same kind of technique where you have a first-person narrator, and that was a very unreliable narrator. So in this case, it's one of those that you can really must make sure that you can answer a question like that before the exam. Is the main character a reliable narrator? Then the need for the narrative in time. As I've told you before, as I showed you on that other diagram, the story is not told chronologically. So it doesn't begin at the beginning and end at the end. In between, it jumps around. We have flashbacks. He remembers, and then something happens and he remembers something else. So the story is not told chronologically. And the effect of that is that that's why we need to read the story more than once, because we will understand certain parts of the book only the second time. And with the first reading, it creates tension. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether Desiree and Mercedes will choose him. And we don't know which one he will choose. On the first reading, that creates tension. With the second reading, we understand pieces in the events better because we know what's going to happen later. Any questions? Come on, people, you're very quiet. So, narrative time refers to how the narrator chooses to tell the story. Then, on page 71 of this tutorial letter 501, they speak about the characters. Now, when you did the short story, we spoke about flat and round characters. And remember, flat characters do not really change. They're sometimes stereotypes. If you think about the story that I did with you, I Could Have Loved Gold. The father is a flat character. He doesn't change in the story. He starts off being a buffoon and he ends up being a buffoon. In our Christmas reunion, we see the nun. She's an unpleasant prude and she doesn't change. As Tawanda, we get to know as a little boy who adores his brother. And then he develops into a young man who can't wait for his brother to come back. And then he's confronted with grief. If we think in terms of the narrative time, the author of our Christmas reunion used the narrative. I also did not tell the story chronologically. Remember, it starts off with Tawanda skinning the goat in preparation for the feast for Sydney's return. And then he remembers the incident at the school. So it starts, it goes back and he remembers the incident at the school. Then he remembers how Sydney left and became a success and how he looked after them by sending them money. And then we have the climax when Sydney returns and it's clear he suffers from or he has contracted the, AIDS. And then we have the resolution. The mother leaves. I think she committed suicide because he again refers to the river where his father had died. And the sadness at the end. So, like our Christmas reunion, this story is not told chronologically. Now, in a novel, we can have far more characters than in a short story, merely because there are more pages as well. A major character usually has a name, and that person is involved in more than one event. Then a minor character is involved in fewer events, and they can change, but they are not as big a part of the story as the major characters. And so when you make a list of the names of the people, you need to divide them into major and minor characters. How does the main character portray himself? I remember, but as I said, I read the book in the December holiday. I haven't read it lately. But how does he portray himself? The fact he tells you about his dreams, the fact that he did become a journalist, then his time in jail, and he speaks about they walk around like the walking dead. It is, he sees himself as somebody who lost a lot. And loss is actually one of the themes in the book, because he lost, his Cuban friend lost, Mercedes has lost, and Desiree loses her mind. As I've told you before, please have a look at how the other characters see him. How do they describe him? And then, do you think that it's possible if you have a first-person narrator? Is it possible for a first-person narrator to be truly objective? When we have the third person, the omniscient narrator, I think there will be short stories where we have a third person narrator. Then it is different. They know what other people are thinking, but the first person is a bit like me. I don't know anything about you, and because we have the rule that you should not have your videos on, I don't know what you even look like. So the only information I get from you is the bit that you write in the chats, and whether you come to the classes and so on. So the first person narrator is often part of the tension, because we don't know whether he's giving us all the facts. He only gives us the facts that he has to give. Now we come to the themes. And the definition in your study guide is the main point of the story, which I feel does not give you enough information. It is what the author, and I like this, it's a bit like a message in a bottle. You need to open the bottle to find the message. You need to open the book in the metaphorical sense to find the message in the book. What the author wants you to learn or know. And it's a broad idea about life. And then most important, it's usually not stated, but it must be inferred. It means that you have to use the information that the book gives you to have a look at the theme, to find the theme, and then to prove that you are correct. You need to quote and to refer to events. So we're back with the plot that you need to know so well. I read the book in December. I better not have to write an exam on it now. So you have to read it twice before you do the assignment, and then after the assignment, but before the exam, you will need to read it again. Then what I want to see if I can't, oh no, I can't. I thought I'd be able to move this. What critical belief about life is the author trying to convey in the writing of the novel? And it's quite important because there are more than one theme. Just like a novel can have more characters than a poem or an epic poem or a short story. The novel can have far more themes. And if I were you, I'd have a page, put it columns in, write the themes on top of each column, and then if you find a quote that fits a theme, write down the quote and write the page number. If there's an event about illustrating or commenting on the theme, write down the event in whatever shorthand you want and the page number. Because it's very difficult. For me, it's going to be even more difficult because I downloaded the book from Amazon on my tablet. But you need to have the page references for your assignment, and also not the page references, but if you are prepping for the exam, it makes life much easier for you if you have the pages to go back. So in this case, love is an important, because he is madly in love with Desiree. And then he has a very full relationship with Mercedes. Also about art and its place or role in society. Why do people love art? And this is now music, writing, fine arts, sculptures. What is its role in society? And then very strongly, inequality. Some people simply have with the apartheid, where we see the external conflict when he's arrested. And remember, at the end, he knew the major actually quite well. So inequality in the sense that some people simply have much more power than others. And then class, which in this case has to do with money as well. And then his friendship. And what I remember about friendship, actually better than his friendship with Mercedes's father, was his attachment to the dog. And then, very important, history and transition. He speaks about Sophiatown. He speaks about apartheid. Transition, to move from one space or phase to another. What happens in that time? And does it really change? And does it really change for the ordinary person? I would like you to Google the term everyman. It's everyman, one word, because that is a literary reference for the ordinary person, which to my mind links very closely to the idea of small things. Ordinary people struggling with big issues, but they're not important enough. As he said, I'm not Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela. And that to me was the main theme. But remember, I said that a book changes as we change. Maybe I've changed since December, and when I read the book, I will find something else. But it is this big search for meaning. How do I give meaning to a life? I grew up in a poor suburb. Then I go to jail for 18 years, even though I'm actually innocent. It was unfair to send me to jail. And now I struggle to survive. I have a boring job, which I don't like very much. How do I make meaning from that? Something else, if you have time to research it, is it's a well-known device to have a person, a literary device, to have a person walking through a city in search of himself. If you have ever been on your own in a strange big city, it has, I've had that experience quite often because I travel quite often. And you walk around and you see things and you take photos and what else. But it does affect one to simply move through a strange area. And it's the same thing with him. His travels through Johannesburg becomes a kind of metaphor of his search for meaning. Let's go back to the image of the bridge. A bridge is supposed to take us to the other side. As I remember the book, he doesn't actually get to an other side. I started off by saying this is an author of which South Africa can be proud. I liked the interview. He, as mixed up as the main character in his story is, he seems to be sorted out, a talented young man going places. That's the author, not the main character. He is not scared to tackle difficult issues. In that review that I read, he speaks of his respect for the characters and literature and so on. So I am really looking forward to reading the book again, and I do hope that I have given you some pointers, because I think I read more quickly. I read quickly, and I hope to have a bit more time than students writing exams to read a book. But your first reading, if you are prepping for the assignment, must start very soon. Here's a question about our Christmas. For our Christmas reunion, would the elder brother be a flat character or a round character? I would call him a flat character, Kayla, because remember, he doesn't really change. He makes a mess of his life. He is very successful, but he contracts AIDS and he dies a horrible death. But I wouldn't call him a round character. We don't have that change in insight that we have with Tawanda. Remember, because the story is told chronologically, we actually see the insight Tawanda has right in the beginning of the book. But he says that this is so interwoven with his brother. This, I can now remember, it's in the third or second paragraph on the left-hand side, where he sees the importance of the argument with the nun. He comes to insight, which the same doesn't happen to Sydney. So I would say Tawanda is a far more round character than Sydney. Any other questions? I hope all of you are going to write in the chat. You can't wait to start reading the book now. Any questions? Listen, I know most of you. Thank you, Kayla. I'm going to remind you of that one when you start complaining about the assignment. Now, what I'm going to do is, in about 2-3 weeks' time, I haven't worked out July yet, I am going to speak about the book, and then, like I did for the our Christmas reunion, I'm going to discuss the assignment with you. But the discussion of the assignment will work much better if you have already read the book and at least started thinking. Because if it's only me speaking, we only have one opinion. But if we are, let's say it's the 5 of us again, and we speak about it and we have different opinions, it will really work much better. And we will have far more ideas. Melissa, you want to ask something? You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I got an SMS to say that there's a workshop happening on the 24th. I assume that this one takes the place of that.
When's the 24th?
It's Wednesday, next week, Wednesday.
Oh, I don't have my, oh, I can just have a look on my calendar. 24th. Now I have it down as social work, but I'll have a look.
Okay.
I'll have a look, and they usually confirm it again later on. So
Okay,
I'll have a look. Maybe I made a mistake when I copied my, oh, but I can find the schedule quite easily. Sorry, I just need to find the schedule. The 24th, no, I have the social work people.
Okay, because this one did come afterwards, the notification for this one. So I thought maybe it was.
Yeah, now I'm responsible for the social work and the commerce students and the postgraduates, and we more or less have 3 classes a week. So the 24th will be too soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
But your assignment on this one needs to be in the beginning of August, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that's right. I think the 1st or the 3rd or the 5th maybe.
Okay, so I'll make sure we have at least 2 workshops before the assignment needs to go in. The problem with this assignment is that it really takes is that you need to read so much, because you really need to work on it twice. There's one guy. Sorry for being silent. My knowledge on the book is not that great at the moment. That's why I did the class in this way, because the book is dense. If I say dense, it means there's a lot of information in the book, and there are many themes in the book. And if you only discover the themes with the first reading, the second reading is the one where you actually start thinking about it. What I want you to do is to have a running start when you start reading. Yes, Kyla, previously the tutorial letter, that's 501, was supposed to be the study guide, and that's, I'm sorry, it's you know it as the tutorial letter 501. Shows you how old I am. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a good exam. Do you still have quite a few things to write? Melissa said she has to write causa. Any others? Okay, people. Good luck if you have any more exams to write. And then I'll see you in about 2 weeks' time, so that we can still fit in 2 more lessons before the assignment needs to go in. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.